What happens when America's most fearless political commentator goes head-to-head with royalty's most controversial figure? The answer shocked millions, and what Meghan Markle said next will leave you speechless. The studio lights dimmed, the audience fell silent, and in that moment, everyone knew this wasn't going to be just another interview. Greg Gutfeld sat across from Meghan Markle, his trademark smirk barely hiding the storm brewing beneath. She adjusted her posture, camera ready, polished, calculated. But Gutfeld, he was locked in. This was his arena, his rules. Subjected was palpable before a single word was spoken. Meghan had agreed to appear on Gutfeld's late-night show to discuss her latest philanthropic ventures, her life after royalty, her vision for change. But Greg had other plans. He wasn't here for pleasantries. He wasn't here to play nice. He was here to ask the questions no one else dared to ask. And Meghan, she thought she was ready. She wasn't. Foregoing, the interview started smoothly enough. Gutfeld welcomed her with a polite nod. A few safe questions about her charity work, her recent projects. The audience clapped. Meghan smiled. Everything seemed normal, controlled. But those who knew Gutfeld knew better. This was the calm before the storm. He was setting the stage, luring her into a false sense of security. And then, without warning, he struck. "Let's talk about accountability," Gutfeld said, his tone shifting like a blade unsheathed. "You've spent years talking about truth, about being silenced, about breaking free. But here's what I don't understand, Meghan. When does the victim narrative end? When do you stop blaming everyone else and start taking responsibility for your own choices?" The studio froze. Unborn's smile flickered, her eyes narrowed. The carefully crafted composure she'd walked in with began to crack. She leaned forward, her voice measured but sharp. "Greg, with all due respect, you have no idea what I've been through. The scrutiny, the lies, the relentless attacks from the British press, from people like you who twist everything I say." "People like me?" Gutfeld interrupted, his voice rising just enough to cut through her defense. "I'm not twisting anything, Meghan. I'm reading your own words, your interviews, your documentaries. You've made a career out of playing the victim while living in a mansion in California. You claim you wanted privacy, yet you can't stop doing interviews. You said you wanted to step away from the spotlight, yet here you are, on my show, under those very same lights you claim to despise." Flooring, the audience gasped. Meghan's jaw tightened. Her hands gripped the armrest. This wasn't going the way she planned. This wasn't the softball interview she was used to. This was a battle, and Gutfeld wasn't backing down. "You don't get to question my trauma," Meghan fired back, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "You don't get to sit there, comfortable in your privilege, and tell me how I should process what I've been through." Gutfeld laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A real, genuine laugh that echoed through the studio like a thunderclap. "Privilege?" he said, leaning back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. "Meghan, you married into one of the wealthiest, most powerful families on the planet. You lived in palaces. You had staff, security, a global platform. And now you're lecturing me about privilege? That's rich. Literally." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Some gasped. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to look away. Meghan's face flushed. Her breathing quickened. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was cornered. And everyone watching knew it. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was war. Meghan Markle wasn't used to this. She had faced the British tabloids, survived royal protocol, sat down with Oprah and controlled every beat of that conversation. But this was different. Gutfeld wasn't here to sympathize. He was here to dismantle. "Let's get specific," Gutfeld continued, his voice calm but cutting like ice. "You claimed the royal family was concerned about your son's skin color. That's a serious accusation, Meghan. Racism. You threw that bomb into the world, watched it explode, and then refused to name names. You can't do that. You can't make an accusation like that and hide behind vague statements." Meghan's eyes flashed with defiance. "I never said it was racism. I said there were concerns, conversations. And yes, those conversations were deeply troubling." "Then who said it?" Gutfeld leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. "If it happened, name them. If it's true, tell the world. Because right now you've painted an entire institution, an entire family with that brush, and they can't defend themselves because you won't give them the chance." The audience was on the edge of their seats. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public reckoning. Meghan shifted uncomfortably. Her media training kicked in, her voice softening, trying to regain control. Greg, I came here to talk about my work, about the foundation, about helping women and children. Mistaken, Gutfeld interrupted sharply. You came here because your brand depends on staying relevant, and staying relevant means staying controversial. You've built your entire post-royal identity on being the wronged woman, the silenced voice. But you're not silenced, Meghan. You're one of the loudest voices in the world. And what you're saying? It's destroying reputations without evidence. That's not brave. That's cowardly. Meghan's composure shattered. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked. How dare you? How dare I? Gutfeld shot back. How dare you weaponize victimhood while actual victims don't have million-dollar Netflix deals? How dare you lecture the world about compassion while throwing your own family under the bus? The studio erupted into chaos. Some audience members stood and applauded. Others shouted in protest. Meghan stood abruptly, her face a mixture of rage and disbelief. "This interview is over," she said, her voice shaking. But Gutfeld wasn't finished. Not even close. Meghan turned toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the studio floor. The cameras followed her every move. The audience held its breath. This was the moment, the walkout everyone would talk about for weeks. But then Gutfeld's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Demolition? Running away again, Meghan? That's your pattern, isn't it?" She stopped, her back still turned, her shoulders tensed. The entire studio froze. "You ran from Toronto when Suits ended. You ran from the royal family when things got hard. You ran from your own father. And now you're running from me because I'm asking questions you don't want to answer." Slowly, Meghan turned around. Her eyes were blazing. The polished, media-trained Duchess was gone. What stood there now was raw emotion, anger, hurt, pride. "You want the truth, Greg?" Her voice was low, dangerous. "The truth is that I was 19 years old when my father sold stories about me to the tabloids for cash. The truth is that I walked into a family that smiled for the cameras and then whispered behind closed doors about whether my child would be too dark for their precious legacy. The truth is that I tried. I tried so hard to fit into a system that was never designed for someone like me. And when I couldn't take it anymore, when my mental health was crumbling, when I told them I was having suicidal thoughts, they told me it would be bad for the institution if I got help." Inability was silent, completely silent. Gutfeld didn't flinch. "And I'm sorry you went through that, truly. Mental health is serious. Suicidal thoughts are serious. But Meghan, you're using that pain as a shield. You're using it to justify every decision, every attack, every narrative. You want sympathy? You have it. But you also want to be immune from criticism. And that's not how the world works." Meghan's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "You think this is easy for me? You think I enjoy being called a liar, a manipulator, a gold digger every single day?" "No," Gutfeld replied, his tone softer now but still firm. "I don't think it's easy, but I also don't think you're helping yourself. You had the world's sympathy after that Oprah interview. You had people rallying behind you. But then the stories kept coming, the contradictions, the selective truths, and people started asking questions. Not because they hate you, Meghan, but because your story doesn't add up." Meghan wiped her eyes quickly, her jaw set. "My story is my truth." "Your truth," Gutfeld repeated, shaking his head. "That phrase right there, that's the problem. There's not your truth and my truth. There's just the truth. And the truth can be proven. It can be verified. But you won't let anyone verify your claims because then you'd lose control of the narrative." A peg the audience was divided. Half were nodding in agreement. Half looked sympathetic toward Meghan. She stood there, caught between walking out and fighting back. And then she made her choice. Part 4. Meghan walked back. Not to her seat, but to the edge of Gutfeld's desk. She leaned against it, arms crossed, staring directly into his eyes. The power dynamic had shifted. This wasn't the guest versus host anymore. This was two people locked in an ideological war. You want verification, Greg? Fine. Let's verify something right now. Her voice was steady, controlled, lethal. You sit here, night after night, mocking people like me, women who speak up, women who refuse to stay silent. You call it accountability. I call it cruelty disguised as comedy. You've made a career out of punching down, out of ridiculing anyone who doesn't fit into your narrow worldview. And now you have the audacity to lecture me about truth? Flushing Gutfeld didn't blink. I mock hypocrisy, Meghan, and you are the definition of it. You preach about privacy while selling your story to the highest bidder. You talk about mental health while attacking your in-laws on global television. You claim you want peace while filing lawsuits left and right. That's not bravery. That's contradiction. Buffering. No, Meghan snapped. That's survival. That's what women have to do in a world that tries to silence them at every turn. You wouldn't understand that because you've never had to fight for your voice. You were given a platform. I had to claw my way to mine. The audience erupted again. Some cheered for Meghan, others cheered for Gutfeld. The studio felt like a battlefield. Gutfeld leaned forward, his expression serious now. You're right, I was given opportunities, but I also worked for them. I didn't marry into them, and I don't pretend to be a victim when things don't go my way. Meghan, you had every advantage. Beauty, talent, a royal title, a global platform. And instead of using it to build something lasting, you used it to burn bridges. That's not the world's fault. That's your choice. Meghan's face hardened. You know what your problem is, Greg? You can't stand that I refuse to play the game. I refused to smile and wave and disappear when they wanted me gone. I fought back. And people like you hate that because it disrupts your comfortable little narrative where women are supposed to suffer in silence. I don't hate you, Meghan, Gutfeld said quietly. And for the first time, his tone wasn't combative. It was almost sad. I pity you because you had everything. And you threw it away, not because of the press, not because of the royals, but because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention. And now you're trapped in a cycle of interviews and documentaries and tell-all books, because if you stop talking, people might forget about you. And that terrifies you more than anything. Meghan's breath caught. Her eyes glistened. For a brief moment, the mask slipped. The carefully constructed armor cracked, and in that moment, everyone saw it. The vulnerability, the exhaustion, the weight of everything she'd been carrying. But just as quickly, she rebuilt the wall. You don't know me, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've lost. Gutfeld nodded slowly. You're right, I don't. But neither does anyone else, because you won't let them. You control the story so tightly that no one can get close enough to see the real you. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. The studio fell silent. The audience didn't know whether to clap, to gasp, or to simply sit in the heaviness of what had just unfolded. Meghan straightened. She took a deep breath, and then, without another word, she walked off the stage. The door closed behind Meghan Markle. The sound echoed through the studio like the final note of a symphony. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Was it a debate? A therapy session? A public execution? Gutfeld remained seated, his expression unreadable. He stared at the empty chair across from him for a long moment. Then he turned to the camera, his trademark smirk returning, but softer this time, more reflective. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice calm but weighted with meaning. What you just saw wasn't about destroying someone. It was about asking the questions that need to be asked. Because when someone uses their pain as a weapon, when someone builds an empire on victimhood, we have a responsibility to push back, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. He paused, letting the words sink in. Meghan Markle is not a villain, but she's not a saint either. She's a human being who made choices, some good, some questionable. And like all of us, she has to live with the consequences of those choices. The difference is, she has a microphone that reaches millions, and with that kind of power comes accountability. The audience began to clap, slowly at first, then building into a roar. Gutfeld leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. I don't know if Meghan will watch this. I don't know if she'll reflect on what was said here tonight, but I hope she does, because the truth isn't the enemy. Denial is. And until she stops running from the uncomfortable questions, she'll never find the peace she's searching for. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing. We live in a world where everyone wants to be heard, but no one wants to be challenged, where everyone demands empathy, but refuses to extend it. And that's the real tragedy. Not what happened in this interview, but what's happening in our culture. We've lost the ability to have hard conversations, to disagree without demonizing, to question without canceling. Gutfeld stood, straightening his jacket. Meghan Markle walked off this stage tonight, but the conversation? That doesn't end here, because the questions remain. The contradictions remain, and until they're addressed, this story will never be over. He gave one final look to the camera. Good night, America, and remember, the truth doesn't care about your feelings. It just is. Ambiguous. The lights dimmed, the camera stopped rolling, and the world exploded. Did Gutfeld go too far? Or did he say what everyone was thinking? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Team Gutfeld or Team Meghan? And if you want more fearless breakdowns of the moments that shocked the world, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon because we're just getting started. Don't miss what happens next.